At 5:30 in the morning of July the 16th, the atomic age began. News that Operation Trinity had been successful was swiftly passed to President Truman. He had recently arrived at a conference in the Berlin suburb of Potsdam, meeting with Stalin and Churchill, discussing the future of Europe. Truman didn't hesitate. He ordered his commanders to prepare to drop the new bombs on Japan as soon as possible. Two bombs, a uranium device codenamed Little Boy and a plutonium bomb called Fat Man, were now transported to the Mariana Islands. There, the immensely experienced Colonel Paul Tibbets, leader of the specially trained 509th Composite Group, prepared his B-29. At 2:45 in the morning of August the 6th, Tibbets lifted his plane, named Enola Gay after his mother, off the runway. On board, he was carrying Little Boy. The flight to the target, Japan's fourth largest city, Hiroshima, went without a hitch. At 8 a.m., on a bright sunny morning, Enola Gay approached the city at 33,000 feet. Then, at just after 8:15, Little Boy was released. The uranium bomb had the power of nearly 13,000 tons of TNT. The temperature beneath the mushroom cloud reached 5,000 degrees centigrade. Thousands of people were instantly vaporized. Shock waves leveled buildings up to a 5-mile radius. Estimates of the death toll vary hugely. Some put it at 40,000 people, others at 100,000. Many suffered from terrible burns and blistering. Over the course of the following weeks, thousands more people died from radiation poisoning. On August the 7th, 1945, President Truman told the world about the bomb and issued Japan with a warning.
Let there be no mistake. We shall completely destroy Japan's power to make war. They may expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth.
But no Japanese surrender was received. 2 days later, on August the 9th, Fat Man was dropped on the major military port of Nagasaki. The plutonium bomb was even more powerful. In fact, the bomb fell way off target, but it still caused massive destruction. Between 35,000 and 50,000 people are estimated to have died in the explosion. The Japanese government could now have no doubt that they faced a new and horrific weapon. But the question remained, would even this force them to surrender? The Nagasaki bomb was followed by a stark warning from US Secretary of State James Burns.
There is still time, but little time, for the Japanese to save themselves from the destruction which threatens them.
The intention was clear. The atom bomb would be used again and again until Japan gave in. That same day, Japan's position became even more precarious. Early in the morning of August the 9th, 1.5 million Soviet troops stormed into Manchuria and northern China. The Soviet leader Joseph Stalin was not only after territory, he wanted a say in any final peace settlement in the Far East. There were still over 1 million Japanese troops in the area, but the Red Army blitzkrieg was unstoppable. The Japanese position in the war had become untenable. That evening, Emperor Hirohito met with his 6 top military and political leaders. The war cabinet was divided. 3, led by the Prime Minister, Baron Kantaro Suzuki, argued for peace. The other 3 wanted to continue fighting. It was deadlock. Then the Japanese Prime Minister broke with all precedent and asked the Emperor for his opinion. Emperor Hirohito voted for peace, on condition that his position as head of state was maintained. The next morning, a proposal was sent to the US Secretary of State James Burns. Burns rejected it. Only unconditional surrender would do. As the Japanese War Cabinet argued amongst itself, Soviet troops continued to tear into Mongolia. At the same time, American fighters now roamed freely over Japan, shooting up military targets and transport links at will. Massive air raids continued to devastate Japan. Then, on August the 14th, the Truman administration sent word that the Emperor's position would be safeguarded, provided he agreed to accept the orders of the Supreme Commander of Allied forces. Hirohito used his huge prestige to instruct the War Cabinet to endure the unendurable and accept the terms. That day in Washington, President Truman announced that Japan had surrendered unconditionally.
I deem this reply a full acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration, which specifies the unconditional surrender of Japan.
Cheering, singing crowds erupted onto the streets of every American city. In Britain, it was midnight when the new Prime Minister, Clement Attlee, broadcast the news.
Japan has today surrendered. The last of our enemies is laid low. Peace has once again come to the world. Let us thank God for this great deliverance, and his mercies. Long live the King.
Within minutes, crowds appeared on the streets of London. Many gathered outside Buckingham Palace. A giant street party lasted well into the following day. The next morning, August the 15th, an astounded Japanese people listened to the voice of their God Emperor for the very first time. He told them that Japan's position had become impossible, and the country was obliged to surrender. All military forces must lay down their arms. Such was the emperor's prestige that almost every unit obeyed. But in Manchuria, despite the Japanese ceasefire, the Soviet forces fought on. For the first time, large numbers of Japanese troops now surrendered. Nevertheless, the Soviets, determined to seize as much territory as possible, continued to advance. Stalin wouldn't stop the fighting for another week. By then, the whole of Manchuria, half of Korea, and part of northern China were under his control. Elsewhere in Southeast Asia, in the Philippines and on many of the Pacific islands bypassed by the Americans, it took weeks for news of the surrender to reach isolated Japanese garrisons. Some Japanese soldiers would remain hidden in the jungle for more than 30 years. Finally, on August the 28th, 2 weeks after the surrender, the first US troops arrived in Japan. A huge US fleet gathered in Tokyo Bay, sailing past the shattered hulks of the once proud Japanese Navy that they had so comprehensively defeated. Several days later, on September the 2nd, 1945, a Japanese delegation came aboard the USS battleship Missouri. On its quarterdeck, the new Japanese Foreign Minister, Mamoru Shigemitsu, signed the document of unconditional surrender. It was countersigned by US General Douglas MacArthur, the man who would effectively run Japan for the next 6 years.
As Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, I announce it my firm purpose, in the tradition of the countries I represent, to proceed in the discharge of my responsibilities with justice and tolerance.
Then a force of more than 2,000 Allied aircraft roared overhead. It was a fitting tribute to the overwhelming power which had finally brought Germany and Japan to utter defeat.